Blood soaked through the snow behind the old clinic, and Elena Hart heard the sound before she saw it. A low, broken breathing, like something struggling to hold on to life with the last of its strength. She stepped out into the freezing night, wearing only her thin work jacket, her flashlight shaking in her hand, and found a massive gray wolf lying against the back wall of the building. Its side was torn open. Its eyes were half closed. And somehow, in that single frozen second, the animal looked directly at her, as if it had been waiting for exactly her, and no one else. Elena did not think. She dropped to her knees in the snow, ignoring the cold soaking through her jeans, and pressed her hands against the wound. The wolf's blood was warm, shockingly warm, spilling over her fingers faster than she could stop it. Her mind raced through every emergency procedure she had ever learned working at the veterinary clinic, but nothing had prepared her for a wild wolf this large, this wounded, lying so still that she feared each breath might be its last. "Stay with me," she whispered, dragging her jacket off and pressing it hard against the wound. "Please, just stay with me." The wolf's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven waves. Elena looked around for help, but the street behind the clinic was empty, swallowed by darkness and falling snow. There was no time to call anyone, no time to wait. She grabbed the animal beneath its front legs, gritted her teeth against the burning ache in her arms, and pulled with everything she had toward the clinic's back door. It took nearly 5 minutes to get the wolf inside, 5 minutes that felt like hours. By the time she reached the exam table, her arms trembled from exhaustion, and her hands were slick with blood. She flipped on every light in the room, grabbed gauze, disinfectant, anything she could find, and began working with the kind of desperate focus that blocks out fear completely. The wolf's golden eyes opened halfway again, watching her. There was something in that gaze that did not feel like an animal in pain. It felt like a person trapped inside a body that was failing, watching the only living soul willing to help. "You're going to be okay," Elena said, more to convince herself than the wolf. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." She worked through the night, cleaning the wound, stopping the bleeding as best she could, wrapping bandages around fur-soaked red. Her hands ached, her back ached, but she did not stop, because stopping meant the wolf might not make it until morning, and something about this animal made her chest tighten every time she thought about losing him. Near 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She sat on the floor beside the exam table, her back against the cold metal leg, and let her eyes rest for just a moment. In the quiet of the clinic, with only the wolf's slow breathing filling the silence, old memories she had spent years trying to bury began creeping back into her mind. She thought of her father, and the year everything fell apart. She thought of the anger she had carried for so long, anger she told herself she had let go of, but that still lived somewhere deep inside her chest like a splinter that never fully healed. She thought of the last conversation they never had, the apology she never got to hear, and the words she had never said out loud until this very moment, alone, in a dim clinic, beside a dying wolf who could not possibly understand her. "I forgive you," she whispered into the darkness, her voice cracking. "I don't know if you can hear me, wherever you are, but I forgive you. I'm done carrying this." She did not notice the wolf's ears twitch at the sound of her voice. She did not notice the faint golden light that flickered, just for an instant, beneath his fur, gone before her eyes could fully register it. She was too tired, too lost in her own grief, to see the wound beneath her hands begin to close faster than any injury should. By the time dawn broke through the clinic windows, Elena had fallen asleep sitting upright, her head resting against the exam table. She woke to the sound of a low groan, not from an animal, but from a man. Her eyes snapped open. The wolf was gone. In its place, lying across the exam table that was far too small for him, was a man unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, powerfully built, with dark hair damp against his forehead, and a jagged scar running across his ribs, exactly where the wolf's wound had been. His eyes opened slowly, and when they found hers, Elena's breath caught in her throat, because they were the same eyes. The same intense, golden-brown gaze that had stared at her from the wolf's face just hours earlier. "Where?" the man said, his voice rough and unfamiliar. "Am I?" Elena scrambled back, knocking over a metal tray, sending instruments clattering across the floor. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You need to explain what is happening right now," she said, pressing herself against the far wall. There was a wolf. Right there. On that table. Bleeding out. And now there's a man. Lying in the exact same spot with the exact same wound. The man sat up slowly, wincing as he pressed a hand against his side. He looked down at himself, at the fading scar, at the blood dried on his skin, and something like confusion crossed his face, quickly replaced by a guarded stillness. "I don't remember," he said carefully. "I remember pain. I remember running. I remember snow." He paused, his eyes lifting to meet hers again. "And I remember a voice." Elena's pulse spiked. "What voice?" "Yours," he said simply. The silence that followed stretched long and uncomfortable. Elena wanted to laugh it off, to tell herself this was some kind of elaborate trick, that maybe she had fallen asleep and dreamed the entire wolf encounter, that this stranger had simply wandered into her clinic, injured, and she was connecting dots that did not exist. But the scar on his ribs matched perfectly. The timing matched perfectly. And there was something about the way he held himself, cautious and alert like a predator assessing a room, that told her this was no ordinary man. "I need you to leave," she said, even though her voice shook with uncertainty. "I don't know what's going on here, but this isn't normal, and I have rules about who I let into this clinic." "I understand," the man said, surprising her with the gentleness in his tone. He slid off the table carefully, testing his legs, wincing slightly, but standing steady. "You saved my life. I won't forget that." He looked around the room, taking in the details, the medical supplies, the framed photos on the wall, before his gaze settled back on her. "My name is Cale." "Elena," she said, before she could stop herself, immediately regretting giving a stranger her name. Cale studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Elena," he repeated quietly, as though testing the shape of the word. "Thank you. For everything you did tonight. I won't forget it." Before she could respond, before she could ask any of the 100 questions racing through her mind, he moved toward the back door, with a speed and grace that did not match someone who had been bleeding out on an exam table only hours earlier. He paused at the threshold, glancing back at her one final time. "Be careful the next few days," he said. "Lock your doors. Something is coming, and I would rather you were far from it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the pale morning light, before Elena could even stand up from the wall she had been pressed against. She rushed to the door, throwing it open, searching the empty street in both directions, but there was no sign of him, no footprints in the fresh snow, no trace that he had ever been there at all, except for the blood still staining her exam table and the torn, bloodied jacket lying discarded on the floor. She stood in the doorway for a long time, the cold air biting at her skin, her mind spinning through explanations that made no sense. A wolf had become a man. A dying animal had somehow healed from a fatal wound in a matter of hours. And a stranger who called himself Cale had walked out of her clinic, warning her about danger she did not understand, speaking as though he already knew things about her life that he had no way of knowing. Elena closed the door slowly and turned to look at the empty exam table. She should have been terrified. Some small, sensible part of her was screaming that she needed to call someone, tell someone, forget this had ever happened. But beneath the fear was something else entirely, something she could not name, a pull she felt every time she thought about those golden eyes. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, cleaning the clinic, restocking supplies, trying to convince herself that normal life would resume as usual. But that evening, as she locked up and walked to her car through the quiet parking lot, she felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She spun around, scanning the tree line at the edge of the lot, and for just a moment, she thought she saw two golden eyes glowing in the shadows between the trees. By the time she blinked, they were gone. Elena drove home faster than usual that night, checking her rearview mirror more times than she would ever admit, and when she finally locked her front door behind her, she stood there for several minutes, her back pressed against the wood, trying to steady her breathing. Whatever Cale was, whatever had happened in that clinic, she knew one thing, with absolute certainty. Her life had changed the moment she chose to save that wolf, and there was no going back to the person she had been before that snowy, blood-soaked night. Somewhere deep in the forest beyond the edge of town, Cale moved through the trees, with a strength returning to his body faster than should have been possible. Every step brought back pieces of memory he had lost for years, fragments of a life stolen from him, a throne taken by betrayal, and a curse that had trapped him in wolf form, until the day someone offered him something he had stopped believing existed. Forgiveness, given freely, without condition, without knowing who he truly was. He stopped at the edge of a ridge overlooking the town, its lights flickering faintly in the distance, and closed his eyes, breathing in the cold night air. For the first time in longer than he could remember, hope stirred inside his chest. But hope, he knew, always came with a price. And somewhere out there, forces that had waited years for his weakness were about to learn that the wolf they thought they had broken forever had just found a reason to become a king again. 3 days after the wolf vanished from her exam table, Elena found a note pinned beneath her windshield wiper, and her hands went cold reading it. There were only 4 words written in sharp, confident handwriting. "You are being watched." No signature, no explanation. Just a warning that made her spin around in the empty parking lot, searching every shadow, every parked car, every corner where someone could be hiding. She had told herself for 3 days that the wolf, the man, the whole impossible night, had been some kind of fever dream, brought on by exhaustion and too many overnight shifts. But the note in her hand felt real. The paper was damp from the morning frost, which meant someone had placed it there recently, possibly while she was inside working. Someone had been close enough to touch her car without her noticing. Elena drove straight to the police station, then stopped halfway there, pulling into an empty lot as doubt crept in. What would she even say? That a wolf turned into a man in her clinic and now she was receiving anonymous notes? She would sound unstable at best, delusional at worst. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly, trying to think clearly instead of letting panic take over. That evening, as she left work later than usual, a black car she did not recognize idled across the street from the clinic. 2 men sat inside, watching, making no effort to hide their presence. Elena's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs felt frozen to the pavement. One of the men rolled down his window slightly, just enough for her to see cold, calculating eyes, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Elena Hart," he said, his voice smooth and unfamiliar. "You've been keeping interesting company lately." Her mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "The wolf you saved. Where did he go?" Before she could answer, before her mind could even fully process the question, a low growl rumbled from somewhere near the tree line, bordering the parking lot. The man's expression shifted instantly from calm confidence to something sharper, more alert. Without another word, the black car pulled away, tires screeching against the pavement as it disappeared down the road. Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Slowly, she turned toward the trees, and there, half hidden in the shadows between 2 pines, stood Cale, fully human, his expression dark and serious. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, walking toward her with quiet, controlled steps. "I told you to be careful. You told me that, and then disappeared for 3 days. Elena snapped, adrenaline making her braver than she felt. "And now men I've never met are asking about you like I owe them information. What is going on, Cale? I deserve an explanation." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing how much truth she could handle. Finally, he exhaled and gestured toward a bench near the clinic entrance. "Sit with me. I'll tell you as much as I can." Reluctantly, Elena sat, keeping a careful distance between them despite the strange pull she still felt whenever he was near. Cale remained standing, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding darkness, alert to threats she could not see. "What you saved that night was not simply a wolf," he began. "I come from a world hidden from people like you, a world of shifters, families who carry the blood of wolves and can change between human and animal form. I was born into a position of leadership in my family's community, what you might call a pack. Years ago, before you ever met me, I was betrayed by someone I trusted completely. He took what was mine through deception, and he trapped me in wolf form using something ancient and cruel, a curse designed to keep me weak and broken until I either died or gave up entirely." Elena stared at him, torn between disbelief and the undeniable proof she had witnessed with her own eyes. "That's not possible." "I understand why you would think that," Cale said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face. "But you already saw the proof yourself. I lay dying on your table as a wolf, and I woke up a man with the exact wound in the exact place." Explanations that fit inside the world you understand will not cover everything that exists. She sat quietly, absorbing his words, feeling the strange sensation of her entire understanding of reality shifting beneath her. "So the curse," she finally said. "How did it break?" Cale's expression softened, something vulnerable slipping through his controlled composure for just a moment. The curse required something rare to break it. Forgiveness given honestly, without any expectation of return, spoken to me while I could not defend myself, or explain who I truly was. You did not know what you were doing that night. You were not trying to save a cursed king. You were simply being kind to a dying animal, and speaking words meant for someone else entirely. His golden eyes held hers steadily, but it worked anyway. Elena's chest tightened, memories of that whispered apology to her father rushing back to her. "Those words weren't for you," she said quietly. "I didn't even know you could hear me." "I know," Cale said, "and that is exactly why it worked. Forgiveness offered without conditions, without an audience, without anyone watching to reward you for saying it. That is the rarest kind there is." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Then Elena's mind snapped back to the immediate danger. Those men in the car. Who were they? Cale's jaw tightened. "Men working for my cousin, Draven. He is the one who betrayed me and stole my position while I was trapped. He has spent years ruling in my place, and now that I have broken free of the curse, he will do everything in his power to make sure I never reclaim what belongs to me. That includes eliminating anyone connected to my return, which unfortunately now includes you." Fear coiled tight in Elena's stomach. "So I'm in danger because I helped you?" "Yes," Cale admitted, his voice heavy with something close to guilt. "And I am sorry for that. It was never my intention to put you at risk. But leaving you unprotected now would be far more dangerous than staying close enough to keep watch over you." Elena wanted to argue, to insist she could take care of herself. But the memory of the black car, and the cold eyes of the man who had known her name, sent a shiver through her that stole the words from her mouth. "What happens now?" "Now," Cale said, his gaze steady and unwavering, "I make sure Draven understands that hurting you would be the greatest mistake he could ever make." Over the following days, Elena noticed subtle changes around her life that told her Cale had not been exaggerating. A car that idled too long down her street would suddenly leave without explanation. A stranger who lingered too close in a grocery store aisle would abruptly walk away, pale and unsettled, as though something had frightened him into retreating. She never saw exactly what caused these disappearances, but she began to sense a presence nearby, always watching, always protecting, even when Cale himself was nowhere in sight. One evening, working late at the clinic on a particularly difficult case, Elena stepped outside for fresh air and found Cale leaning against the brick wall near the back entrance, as though he had been waiting for her. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said, though there was less resistance in her voice than there had been days earlier. "Following me around like a bodyguard." "I'm not simply following you," Cale said, his voice quieter than usual. "I meant what I said. You gave me something I thought I would never have again. A second chance. I don't take that lightly." Elena crossed her arms, studying him carefully in the dim light spilling from the clinic windows. "What exactly did I give you, besides breaking a curse you didn't tell me existed?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, his expression unusually open, stripped of the careful control he usually carried. "You gave me proof that kindness still exists, without conditions attached to it. Where I come from, everything is a transaction. Loyalty is bought. Alliances are built on fear or advantage. I had forgotten what it felt like to receive something simply because someone chose to give it, expecting nothing in return." Something in his voice made Elena's chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. She had spent years building walls around herself, protecting her heart after everything that had happened with her father, refusing to let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But standing there in the cold night air, listening to a man who claimed to be a cursed king describe her small act of kindness like it had saved his soul, those walls felt thinner than they had in a very long time. "I still don't fully understand any of this," she admitted quietly. "You don't have to," Cale said, "not yet. But I need you to trust me when I say that Draven will not stop searching for a way to use you against me." and I intend to make sure he never gets that chance." As he spoke those words, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, hidden in the shadow of a parked delivery van, phone raised, capturing every moment of their exchange. The figure lowered the phone slowly, a thin smile crossing his face, before he disappeared into the darkness, already dialing a number that would deliver the information straight to Draven himself. The war for the throne had only just begun, and Elena Hart, without ever asking for it, had become the key piece both sides were now determined to control. The message reached Draven Cross just after midnight, and he read it twice before setting his phone down on the polished stone table in front of him. Around him, the great hall of the Nightfall estate sat silent, except for the crackle of fire in the hearth, a hall he had ruled for 3 years, with a grip so tight that even his closest allies feared crossing him. He had believed, truly believed, that Chaol was gone forever, weakened beyond recovery, trapped in wolf form until age or misfortune finally claimed him. The photo attached to the message shattered that belief completely. "He's alive," Draven said quietly, mostly to himself, though Garrick, his second in command, stood nearby awaiting instruction. "And he's found himself a human." Garrick studied the image on the screen, a woman with tired eyes, standing close to a man whose posture radiated quiet authority, even in casual clothing. "The vet from the edge of town," Garrick said. "She runs the small animal clinic near the highway." "She broke the curse," Draven said, his voice low and controlled, though something dangerous simmered beneath the calm surface. "Somehow, without even knowing what she was doing, she broke it." Garrick's expression shifted, wary. "How is that possible?" "The curse required conditions almost impossible to meet." "Impossible for someone trying," Draven said, standing and moving toward the tall windows overlooking the dark forest beyond the estate. "But not impossible for someone who had no idea what she was doing at all. That is the flaw in ancient magic. It rewards purity of intention over knowledge or skill." He pressed his palm against the cold glass, staring out at the trees where his cousin had once run free, before Draven's own hands had orchestrated his downfall. Find out everything about her, her routine, her family, her weaknesses. If Chaol believes he can rebuild his strength through her, then she becomes the fastest way to destroy him. "And if Chaol protects her?" Garrick asked carefully. A slow, cold smile spread across Draven's face. "Then he will be forced to choose between protecting a human woman and reclaiming everything he lost. Either choice weakens him. Either choice works in our favor." Meanwhile, miles away in the quiet town, Elena sat at her kitchen table long after midnight, staring at a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Sleep felt impossible with everything Chaol had told her circling endlessly through her mind. She kept replaying the moment the wolf's golden eyes had locked onto hers, the moment she had whispered words meant for a father who would never hear them, the impossible transformation that followed. Every rational part of her insisted this could not be real, yet every instinct told her it absolutely was. A soft knock at her back door made her jump, spilling cold tea across the table. She approached cautiously, peering through the small window before recognizing Chaol standing on her porch, his expression tense in a way she had not seen before. She opened the door quickly. "What happened?" "Draven knows about you," Chaol said without preamble, stepping inside only after she waved him in. "Someone photographed us outside the clinic. It's already reached him." Elena's stomach dropped. "How bad is that?" "Bad enough that I need you to consider leaving town for a while," Chaol said, his jaw tight with barely restrained frustration. "Somewhere he cannot easily find you." "Absolutely not," Elena said immediately, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "This is my home, my clinic. My patients depend on me. I'm not running away because some stranger I've never met decided I'm suddenly a target." "Elena, you don't understand what Draven is capable of," Chaol said, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and softened it again. "He has resources, people loyal to him out of fear, and absolutely no hesitation about using whatever means necessary to protect his position." "Then teach me how to protect myself," Elena shot back, crossing her arms. "Because running isn't a real solution, Chaol. If he's determined to find me, distance won't stop him forever. I'd rather understand what I'm facing than hide from it." Chaol studied her for a long moment, something like reluctant admiration flickering across his features. "You remind me of my mother," he said quietly. She never ran from anything either. It's part of why my father loved her so fiercely. The mention of his family, spoken with such rare tenderness, softened something in Elena's chest, despite the tension of the moment. "Tell me about them," she said. "Your parents." Cale sat down slowly at her kitchen table, the fight draining out of his posture as old memories surfaced. "My father was alpha before me, a fair leader who believed strength meant protecting those who could not protect themselves, rather than dominating them through fear. My mother stood beside him through every hardship, never once backing down from a challenge, even when logic said she should. They were killed in an attack, orchestrated by outside enemies when I was young, an attack Draven's own father secretly helped arrange, though it took years for the truth to surface." "I'm so sorry," Elena said softly. "Draven grew up alongside me after that, raised in my family's household as though he were truly one of us," Cale continued, his voice hollow with old pain. "I trusted him completely. I never saw the resentment building beneath the surface, the belief that he deserved power more than I did, simply because his own father had been denied it generations earlier. By the time I understood what he was planning, it was already too late to stop him." Elena reached across the table without thinking, placing her hand gently over his. "That's not your fault. Trusting someone who betrays you doesn't make the betrayal your responsibility." Cale looked down at her hand resting over his, something raw and unguarded passing through his expression. "I've told myself that for years, and yet the guilt never fully leaves. Perhaps that is simply the price of loving people who eventually disappoint you." The quiet moment between them stretched, filled with something neither of them fully acknowledged out loud, until Cale gently withdrew his hand and stood, his expression hardening back into careful control. "Regardless of how I feel about running, you make a fair point. Hiding will only delay the inevitable. If you insist on staying, then I will teach you what I can. How to recognize danger before it reaches you. How to defend yourself if it does." "Thank you," Elena said, relief and something warmer mixing together in her chest. Over the following 2 weeks, Cale became a constant, careful presence in Elena's life, teaching her self-defense techniques during quiet evenings after the clinic closed, walking the perimeter of her property before she went to sleep each night, always watching, always alert. Elena found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit, the easy conversation between training sessions revealing a man far more thoughtful and burdened by responsibility than the intimidating stranger she had first encountered. One evening, as they sat on her back porch watching the sun disappear behind the tree line, Elena finally asked the question that had been building inside her for days. "What happens when you go back? To reclaim your position, I mean." Cale's expression grew distant, troubled. "There will be a challenge. Pack law requires it, a formal combat trial to determine leadership when a claim is disputed. Draven will not simply hand back what he stole. He will fight to keep it, and he will fight dirty, because that is who he has always been beneath the polished exterior he shows the world." "Is it dangerous?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Extremely," Cale admitted. "Trials like this have ended in death before. Draven knows this, and he will use every advantage available to ensure the outcome favors him." Elena's chest tightened with fear. She had not expected to feel this strongly, for someone she had known such a short time. "Then don't do it. Find another way." "There is no other way," Cale said gently. "My people are suffering under his rule, living in fear instead of security. I cannot simply walk away and let that continue, no matter the personal risk to myself." She wanted to argue further, but something in his steady, resolute gaze told her his mind was made, that the same sense of duty and protection he had shown toward her throughout the past 2 weeks extended just as powerfully toward the people he had once ruled and hoped to protect again. "Then I'm coming with you," Elena said suddenly, the words leaving her mouth before she had fully decided them. Cale turned to face her fully, surprise evident in his expression. "Elena, that is not a decision to make lightly. My world is dangerous, unfamiliar, filled with politics and threats you have never had to navigate before." "I know," she said, steadying her voice despite the fear tightening in her chest. "But you said it yourself. Draven already knows about me. Hiding here alone might actually be more dangerous than standing beside you where you can protect me directly. And besides," she added quietly, meeting his eyes with a determination that surprised even herself, "I didn't save your life just to watch you walk into danger alone now." Something shifted in Cale's expression, a mixture of gratitude and quiet awe that he tried and failed to fully hide. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. "Get used to it," Elena replied, a small, nervous smile tugging at her lips despite the seriousness of the moment ahead. As the last light faded behind the trees, neither of them noticed the faint rustle of movement in the shadows at the edge of her property, another set of eyes watching quietly, gathering information that would soon make its way back to Draven, confirming that the human woman was no longer simply a target of convenience. She had chosen, willingly, to walk directly into the heart of the coming storm. The road leading into Nightfall territory wound through dense forest, so thick that daylight barely reached the ground, and Elena pressed her hands together in her lap as Cale drove, trying to steady the nervous energy building inside her chest. She had packed only what fit into a single bag, closed the clinic for an indefinite leave with a note to her assistant that felt woefully inadequate for the truth of where she was actually going, and spent the entire drive fighting the urge to ask Cale to turn the car around. "You can still change your mind," Cale said quietly, glancing at her from the driver's seat. "No one would think less of you for it." "I would," Elena said simply, staring out at the endless trees passing by the window. "Besides, we're already halfway there. Turning back now feels a little pointless." Cale's mouth curved into the faintest smile, though his eyes remained watchful on the road ahead. "Just remember what we practiced. Stay close to me once we arrive. Do not speak unless spoken to directly during formal gatherings. And whatever you do, never show fear in front of Draven, even if you feel it. Wolves can sense fear the way you might sense a change in weather." "No pressure then," Elena muttered, earning a low chuckle from him despite the tension thick in the air. The car eventually slowed as they approached a massive iron gate set into a stone wall, stretching in both directions farther than Elena could see. Two guards stood at the entrance, tall and broad-shouldered, their eyes sharp and assessing as the car rolled to a stop. Recognition flickered across their faces the moment they saw Cale behind the wheel, followed quickly by something like shock, and then, more subtly, hope. "Alpha," one of the guards said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though testing whether the title still applied. "Not yet," Cale replied evenly, though something in his posture straightened at the acknowledgement. "But soon, if the trial goes as it should." The gates swung open slowly, revealing a sprawling estate beyond, stone buildings nestled among ancient trees, smoke curling from several chimneys into the gray afternoon sky. Elena's breath caught as she took in the scale of it, far larger and more organized than anything she had imagined when Cale described his world back in the safety of her kitchen. As they drove through the grounds, Elena noticed people, dozens of them, pausing whatever tasks occupied them to watch the car pass. Whispers followed in their wake, some hopeful, some wary, a few openly hostile. She felt the weight of every gaze settling on her specifically, the outsider, the human woman who had somehow become tangled in matters far beyond her understanding. Cale parked the car near the largest building on the property, an imposing structure built from dark stone with tall windows that seemed to watch the surrounding grounds like sentinels. Before they even stepped out, a woman emerged from the entrance, moving toward them with quick, purposeful strides. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly, and sharp eyes that softened noticeably the moment they landed on Cale. "You're alive," the woman breathed, pulling Cale into a fierce embrace the moment he stepped out of the car. "We heard rumors, whispers that something had changed, but I refused to let myself hope until I saw you standing here myself." "Talia," Cale said, returning the embrace with genuine warmth. "It's good to see you." Talia pulled back, studying him carefully, before her gaze shifted to Elena, standing quietly beside the car. Her expression shifted into something more guarded, assessing. "And this is the human who broke the curse. Elena Hart," Cale said, gesturing between them. "Elena, this is Talia Wren. She served as advisor to my father, and continued serving faithfully, even after Draven took control, though I suspect that loyalty came at great personal risk to her." "It did," Talia said simply, though pride flickered in her tired eyes. "But some things are worth the risk." She turned her full attention to Elena, studying her with an intensity that made Elena want to shrink back, though she forced herself to stand tall instead. "You have no idea what you've done, child. The weight of what you've set into motion." "I'm starting to understand," Elena said carefully, Talia's expression softened slightly. Come inside. There is much to discuss, and precious little time before word of Cale's return spreads fully through the territory. We need to prepare before Draven has the chance to strike first. The interior of the building revealed itself to be even more impressive than the exterior suggested. High vaulted ceilings, ancient tapestries depicting scenes of battles and celebrations long past, and an overwhelming sense of history pressing down from every surface. Talia led them through winding hallways into a private study, closing the heavy wooden door firmly behind them before speaking again. Draven already knows you're here, Talia said without preamble. Word travels fast in this territory, faster than any of us would like. He will likely call for the formal trial within days, perhaps even sooner, hoping to catch you off balance before you've had time to properly prepare. I've had years to prepare for this moment, Cale said, though something tight in his voice suggested the confidence was not entirely genuine. Even trapped, even weakened, I never stopped believing this day would come. Believing and being ready are different things, Talia said pointedly. You have spent years as a wolf, cut off from training, from combat, from everything that once made you formidable. Draven has spent those same years consolidating power, surrounding himself with loyalists, and undoubtedly preparing specifically for the possibility of your return. Elena watched the exchange with growing unease, understanding now just how dangerous the road ahead truly was. Is there any way to avoid the trial altogether? She asked. Some other path that doesn't involve fighting? Talia's gaze shifted to her, not unkindly, but with the weary patience of someone explaining a hard truth to someone who did not yet fully understand the world they had entered. Pack law is ancient and unbending on this matter. Leadership disputes must be settled through combat, witnessed by the full pack, to ensure the strongest and most capable leader emerges. It is brutal, yes, but it prevents leaders from claiming power through manipulation or deceit alone. Unfortunately, it also means Draven cannot simply be removed through negotiation or political maneuvering. Then we make sure I'm ready, Cale said firmly, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed genuine concern. Starting now. Over the following days, Elena watched Cale train relentlessly, sparring with pack members in a large open courtyard behind the main building, pushing his body harder each session, as old strength and instincts slowly returned to muscles weakened by years trapped in wolf form. She spent her own time learning as much as she could about pack customs and history from Talia, who despite her initial wariness, gradually warmed toward Elena as the days passed, recognizing genuine care in the way Elena watched Cale train, worry evident in every line of her expression. You care for him, Talia observed one afternoon as they sat together, watching Cale spar with a broad-shouldered pack member named Ren. More than you probably intended to. Elena's cheeks warmed, though she did not deny it. It's complicated. I barely know him, not really. Not in the way that should matter for feelings like this to make sense. Feelings rarely follow the rules of what should make sense, Talia said with a knowing smile. I watched his parents fall in love decades ago, an unlikely match by every measure, and yet it became the strongest bond I have ever witnessed. Sometimes the heart understands things the mind has not yet caught up to. Their conversation was interrupted by raised voices from the courtyard, and Elena's stomach dropped as she saw Cale stumble backward from a particularly hard strike, catching himself before he fell, but clearly winded. Ren immediately lowered his stance, concern flashing across his face. Alpha, are you well? Fine, Cale said tightly, straightening despite the visible strain in his posture. Again. Cale, perhaps we should rest for today, Elena called out before she could stop herself, worry overriding her earlier promise to stay quiet during pack matters. Every head in the courtyard turned toward her, and for a tense moment, Elena worried she had overstepped badly. But Cale's expression, when he looked at her, held nothing but quiet gratitude beneath the exhaustion. She's right, he admitted, allowing Ren to help steady him. We'll continue tomorrow. Later that evening, as the estate grew quiet under a blanket of stars, Elena found Cale sitting alone, near the edge of the training courtyard, staring out at the dark tree line beyond the property walls. She approached carefully, settling beside him without a word. You shouldn't push yourself so hard, she said softly after a long silence. I don't have the luxury of taking it slow, Cale replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something deeper, something like fear, he rarely allowed himself to show. Every day I delay strengthens Draven's position further. Every day I remain weak gives him more time to prepare countermeasures against whatever advantage I might find. And if you push too hard and hurt yourself before the trial even happens? Elena asked gently. What good does that do anyone? Cale turned to look at her, something vulnerable breaking through his usual composed exterior. I'm afraid, Elena. Genuinely afraid, for the first time in longer than I can remember. Not simply of losing the trial, but of losing everything I've only just begun to rebuild. My position, my people's trust. He paused, his gaze holding hers with quiet intensity. You. Her breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice. You won't lose me, she said softly, surprising herself with the certainty behind the words. Whatever happens in that trial, I'm not going anywhere. Cale reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, before gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I never expected any of this, he admitted quietly. Not the curse breaking, not finding my way back here, and certainly not finding someone like you along the way. Elena leaned into his touch without fully deciding to, the walls she had built around her heart for years, feeling thinner than ever beneath his steady gaze. Neither did I, she whispered. Neither of them noticed the door to the main building opening quietly behind them, nor the figure standing in the shadows, who watched the tender moment with narrowed, calculating eyes, before disappearing back inside to draft another message, one that would soon find its way into Draven's waiting hands. Boz, revealing exactly how deeply Cale's feelings for the human woman had already grown, and exactly how that vulnerability might be exploited when the time came. News of the formal challenge arrived on a gray morning, delivered by a messenger dressed in dark clothing bearing an emblem Elena did not recognize, a silver crescent moon stitched over a black background. The messenger stood stiffly in the main hall, refusing refreshment, refusing to sit, delivering his single sentence with cold formality, before turning to leave without waiting for a response. Draven Cross accepts the challenge to his leadership and names the trial ground as neutral territory, 3 days from today, at dawn. The moment the door closed behind the messenger, the hall erupted into hushed, urgent conversation. Talia immediately began issuing instructions to PAC members Elena did not recognize, coordinating logistics for witnesses, security, and the countless formal requirements such a trial demanded. Cale stood silently through it all, his expression unreadable, though Elena noticed the tension coiled tight in his shoulders. 3 days, he said quietly, once the hall had mostly cleared. That's less time than I hoped for. It's exactly the amount of time Draven wants you to have, Talia said grimly, returning to where they stood. Enough to prepare, but not enough to fully recover the strength you lost during your years trapped as a wolf. He's calculated this carefully, as he calculates everything. Elena felt her stomach twist with worry, though she tried to keep her expression steady, remembering Cale's earlier warning about never showing fear. What can we do in 3 days to make sure you're ready? Cale exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Train harder. Learn everything I can about how Draven has changed his fighting style over the years, and pray that whatever strength returned when the curse broke continues to grow rather than stall. Over the following 2 days, the estate transformed into a hive of urgent activity. Elena watched as PAC members arrived from surrounding territories, drawn by whispers of Cale's return, some offering support, others watching with cautious neutrality, waiting to see which side would prove victorious, before committing loyalty either way. Ren worked tirelessly alongside Cale during training sessions, while Talia coordinated with allies still loyal to Cale's father's memory, gathering information about Draven's recent tactics and known weaknesses. Elena found herself drawn into the preparations more deeply than she expected, tending to minor training injuries with her veterinary skills, adapted surprisingly well to human patients, offering quiet support during increasingly tense evening strategy sessions, and slowly becoming a familiar, trusted presence among the PAC members who had initially regarded her with suspicion. On the second evening, as exhaustion settled heavily over the entire estate, Elena found herself walking the quiet grounds alone, needing space to process everything unfolding around her. She had not gone far, when a voice called out from the shadows near a cluster of tall trees, stopping her in her tracks. You must be the human everyone keeps whispering about. Elena turned quickly to find a young woman leaning casually against a tree trunk, her posture relaxed, but her sharp eyes carefully assessing. She had short dark hair, and an easy, confident smile that did not quite reach her watchful gaze. "I'm Elena," she said carefully. "And you are?" "Mira Doyle," the woman replied, pushing off from the tree and approaching with unhurried steps. "I grew up alongside Cale and Draven both, before everything fell apart. I've been away for years, working outside the territory, but news travels fast even to those of us who left." "You knew Draven too," Elena said, curiosity overriding caution. Mira's expression darkened slightly. "Better than most, unfortunately. We were close once, before ambition consumed whatever good remained in him. I left partly because I couldn't stomach watching him twist into someone I no longer recognized." "Do you think Cale can win?" Elena asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself, revealing more vulnerability than she intended. Mira studied her for a long moment before answering. "Draven is skilled, calculated, and utterly without mercy when it comes to protecting his position. But Cale has something Draven never truly possessed, not even before the betrayal. Genuine loyalty from people who choose to follow him, not out of fear, but out of real respect and belief in who he is." She paused, her gaze softening slightly. "That kind of support matters more in the end than raw strength alone, though I understand if that offers little comfort given the danger ahead." Elena managed a small, grateful smile despite the anxiety twisting in her stomach. "Thank you. That does help, actually." Mira's expression grew more serious. "Be careful during the trial itself, Elena. Draven is clever, and clever men understand that the fastest way to break an opponent is often not through direct combat, but through exploiting whatever they love most." Her gaze held Elena's meaningfully. "You should stay close to Talia during the trial, surrounded by people you can trust." The warning settled uncomfortably in Elena's chest as she returned to the main building that evening, finding Cale reviewing maps of the trial grounds with Ren and Talia in the study. She relayed Mira's warning quietly once the others had left for the night, watching Cale's expression grow troubled as she spoke. "She's not wrong to worry," Cale admitted, running a tired hand across his face. "Draven has never fought fair in his life. I would be foolish to expect him to start now, especially in a trial where so much is at stake." "Then maybe I shouldn't be there at all," Elena said quietly, the thought having crossed her mind more than once over the past 2 days. "If my presence gives him something to exploit against you." Cale's head snapped up, his expression sharp with immediate refusal. "Absolutely not. Hiding you away would only tell him exactly how much power he holds over both of us. Better you stand visibly protected among allies than hidden somewhere he might easily reach without witnesses to stop him." Elena considered this, understanding the logic, even as fear coiled tighter in her chest. "All right," she said finally. "Then I'll be there, whatever happens." The night before the trial, sleep proved impossible for either of them. Elena found herself wandering the darkened hallways well past midnight, eventually discovering Cale standing alone on a balcony overlooking the moonlit training grounds, his posture tense despite the late hour. "You should be resting," she said softly, joining him at the railing. "I could say the same to you," Cale replied, though a faint, tired smile softened his tone. They stood together in comfortable silence for a long moment, watching moonlight filter through the trees below. Finally, Elena spoke, giving voice to the fear she had been carrying quietly for days. "I'm scared, Cale. Genuinely scared of losing you tomorrow." Cale turned to face her fully, his expression open and unguarded in a way she had rarely seen from him. "I won't pretend the danger isn't real," he said carefully. "But I promise you, Elena, I intend to fight with everything I have, not simply to reclaim my position, but because I've found something worth protecting beyond duty alone." His gaze held hers steadily. "You." Her heart pounded as she searched his face, finding nothing but sincerity there. "Cale," she whispered, unsure exactly what she meant to say next. He reached out slowly, cupping her face gently in his hands, giving her every chance to step back if she wished. When she didn't, he leaned down carefully and pressed a soft, lingering kiss against her forehead instead of her lips, a gesture of tenderness rather than urgency, respecting the uncertainty of the moment they found themselves in. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he murmured against her skin, "know that meeting you was the best thing to happen to me in more years than I can count." Elena closed her eyes, memorizing the warmth of his hands against her face, the steady sound of his breathing, the quiet strength radiating from him despite the exhaustion and fear he had finally allowed her to see. "Come back to me tomorrow," she whispered. "Please." "I intend to," Cale promised, though neither of them could fully ignore the uncertainty hanging heavy in the air between them, nor the knowledge that dawn would bring a battle capable of changing everything, one way or another. Dawn broke pale and cold over the neutral trial grounds, a wide clearing surrounded by ancient trees that had witnessed countless leadership disputes throughout generations. Elena stood among a growing crowd of pack members, Talia close beside her, watching the space fill with witnesses from surrounding territories, all drawn by word of the historic challenge about to unfold. Whispered conversations buzzed through the gathering crowd, some voices hopeful, others openly doubtful, that a leader weakened by years trapped in wolf form could possibly defeat someone who had spent that same time consolidating power and training relentlessly. "Stay close," Talia murmured, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd constantly. "And remember what Mira warned. Draven may attempt something beyond straightforward combat." Elena nodded, her heart hammering as she searched the gathering crowd for Cale. She found him near the edge of the clearing, dressed simply in dark clothing, his expression calm and focused, despite the visible tension in his shoulders. Across the clearing, Draven emerged from the opposite tree line, and Elena's breath caught at her first sight of him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, calculating eyes that swept across the gathered crowd, before settling briefly, deliberately, on Elena herself. A slow, cold smile crossed his face, and Elena felt a chill run through her entire body despite the growing warmth of the rising sun. "So this is the human," Draven called out, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "The one who supposedly broke an ancient curse through nothing more than accidental kindness." He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "How fitting that my cousin's return to power rests on such a fragile, unintentional foundation." Cale's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady when he responded. "The foundation matters less than the outcome, Draven. You stole my position through betrayal and deception. Today, we settle this the way our laws demand, not through manipulation or lies." "Careful, cousin," Draven said, his smile never wavering. "You speak of manipulation, as though you weren't the one who abandoned your responsibilities the moment things became difficult. I simply stepped in to fill the void you left behind." "Enough," Talia's voice rang out sharply, silencing the growing tension before it could escalate further. As the eldest present witness of proper standing, she stepped forward to formally announce the trial's beginning, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed clearing. "The trial of blood begins now. Combat continues, until one combatant yields, or until circumstances demand the presiding witnesses intervene. May the outcome reflect true justice." The two men circled each other slowly at first, tension coiling visibly through the clearing as the crowd fell into anticipatory silence. Elena gripped Talia's arm tightly, unable to tear her eyes away, as Draven struck first. A fast, brutal blow that Cale barely managed to deflect in time. The fight that followed unfolded with a speed and intensity that left Elena's heart racing painfully in her chest. Draven fought with practiced precision, every movement calculated and efficient, clearly the product of years of dedicated training. Cale fought with something rawer, instinctual strength returning to him in bursts as old muscle memory reasserted itself, though Elena could see the strain evident in every labored breath, every slight hesitation that spoke of strength not yet fully recovered. They exchanged blow after blow, the crowd gasping collectively, each time one landed a particularly devastating strike. Elena watched, terrified, as Draven caught Cale with a hard hit across the ribs, sending him stumbling backward, and she had to bite back a cry of alarm, remembering the warning about showing fear. "He's tiring," Talia murmured beside her, worry evident in her tight voice. "Draven has trained specifically for this moment, while Cale has had mere days to prepare." Elena's stomach twisted painfully as she watched Cale struggle to regain his footing, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. Draven pressed his advantage relentlessly, driving Cale backward across the clearing with a series of sharp, calculated strikes. Then, just as Draven prepared for what looked like a finishing blow, his gaze flickered briefly toward Elena in the crowd, a calculated distraction, meant to throw off his opponent's focus, by revealing exactly where his true vulnerability stood watching. "Perhaps," Draven called out between exchanges. "Once I've finished here, I should pay your human a personal visit, see exactly what makes her worth risking everything for." The words landed exactly as intended, fury flashing hot and immediate across Cale's face. But rather than the reckless anger Draven clearly hoped to provoke, something shifted in Cale's posture instead. A calm, focused determination, replacing exhaustion entirely. He straightened fully, meeting Draven's mocking gaze with unwavering steadiness. "You mistake my care for her as weakness," Cale said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent clearing. "But everything I've rebuilt since breaking free of your curse, my strength, my purpose, my will to reclaim what you stole, exists precisely because I finally remembered what it means to protect something worth protecting. You will never understand that, Draven, because you've spent your entire life taking, rather than earning anything through genuine loyalty or love." The crowd murmured at his words, and Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, despite the danger still unfolding before her. Cale moved with renewed intensity, meeting Draven's next strike head-on and countering with a precise, powerful blow that sent his cousin stumbling backward for the first time since the fight began. The battle's momentum shifted visibly from that moment forward. Cale fought with focused determination rather than desperate survival, each movement calculated and controlled despite his obvious exhaustion. Draven, sensing the change, began fighting more recklessly, frustration replacing his earlier calm confidence, as blow after blow failed to secure the decisive advantage he clearly expected. The fight stretched on, both men bleeding, both visibly exhausted, until finally Cale saw the opening he needed. Draven overextended on a strike, meant to end the trial decisively, and Cale sidestepped with the last reserves of his strength, using Draven's own momentum against him to bring his cousin crashing hard to the ground. Before Draven could recover, Cale pinned him firmly, one hand pressed against his throat, close enough to end the trial permanently, but holding back with visible restraint. "Yield," Cale commanded, his voice ragged but unyielding. "Or this ends far worse for you than simple defeat." Silence stretched taut across the clearing, as Draven struggled briefly against the hold, before finally, grudgingly, going still beneath Cale's grip. "I yield," he ground out, the words clearly costing him more than the physical defeat itself. The clearing erupted into a mixture of stunned silence and gradual building cheers, as witnesses processed the trial's outcome. Elena's legs nearly gave out with relief, as Talia gripped her arm supportively, both of them watching as Cale slowly released Draven, and stepped back, breathing heavily, but standing tall, despite visible exhaustion and injury. Talia moved forward quickly, to formally announce the trial's conclusion, her voice carrying authority across the gathered crowd. "By ancient law, witnessed fairly by all present, Cale Ashbourne has reclaimed his rightful position as true alpha of Nightfall territory." The crowd's cheers grew louder, though Elena's attention remained fixed entirely on Cale, who searched the crowd until his eyes found hers, exhaustion and relief mixing openly across his bruised, bloodied face. She broke away from Talia's side without hesitation, pushing through the crowd until she reached him, throwing her arms around him despite his injuries, careless of the blood staining her clothing as he held her tightly against him. "You're all right," she whispered against his chest, relief flooding through her entire body. "I told you I would come back," Cale murmured into her hair, his voice rough with exhaustion, but steady with quiet certainty. Behind them, guards moved to restrain Draven, who watched the reunion with barely concealed fury, his earlier confidence replaced entirely by cold, simmering resentment. As they led him away toward whatever judgment awaited someone who had ruled through betrayal for years, his eyes locked briefly onto Elena's, and something dark and promising passed through his gaze, before he was finally pulled from sight. Elena shivered slightly despite the warmth of Cale's embrace, an uneasy feeling settling deep in her chest that this victory, however hard-fought and genuinely earned, might not yet mark the true end of Draven's threat against them both. In the days following the trial, the Nightfall estate transformed under a wave of cautious celebration, mixed with the practical demands of transferring power back into proper hands. Elena watched as pack members who had once regarded Cale's return with wary uncertainty now approached him openly, offering formal declarations of loyalty, relief evident on faces that had spent years living under Draven's controlling rule. Kale accepted each pledge with quiet grace, though Elena noticed the exhaustion he carefully hid behind composed authority, the physical and emotional toll of reclaiming his position, weighing heavily even amid the celebration. Draven himself had been confined to a secure chamber within the estate, awaiting formal judgment according to pack law, a process Talia explained would take several days to properly complete, given the severity of his crimes. Elena found herself unable to fully relax despite the trial's resolution, an uneasy feeling lingering at the edges of her mind whenever she thought of the cold, promising look Draven had given her before being led away. "You're troubled," Kale observed one evening as they walked together through the quiet estate gardens, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. His injuries from the trial had begun healing rapidly, faster than any normal human recovery would allow, though faint bruising still shadowed his jaw. "I keep thinking about the way Draven looked at me," Elena admitted, wrapping her arms around herself despite the mild evening air. It didn't feel like the look of someone who'd simply accepted defeat. Kale's expression grew serious, concern replacing the relaxed contentment he had carried since the trial's conclusion. "Draven has never accepted defeat gracefully in his entire life. I would be foolish to assume imprisonment alone guarantees our safety." "What happens to him now?" Elena asked. "Officially, I mean. Pack law demands a formal judgment before the full council, likely permanent exile from all territories under our authority, stripped of any claim to leadership or standing," Kale explained, though his tone carried little satisfaction at the prospect. "Some among the council will push for harsher consequences, given the severity of his betrayal and the years of suffering his rule caused many of our people." Elena considered this, an uncomfortable knot forming in her stomach. "Do you think exile will actually stop him from causing more trouble?" Kale's jaw tightened, his silence answering the question more honestly than words might have. "I would like to believe it will," he finally said, "but Draven has always found ways to manipulate circumstances in his favor, even from positions that should have left him powerless. I intend to remain vigilant, regardless of whatever judgment the council ultimately decides." Their conversation was interrupted by Ren approaching quickly across the garden path, his expression tight with urgency that immediately set Elena's nerves on edge. "Alpha, forgive the interruption, but there's a matter requiring your immediate attention. One of the guards assigned to Draven's chamber has gone missing from his post." Kale's entire posture shifted instantly, calm evening warmth replaced by sharp, focused alertness. "Missing how?" "No one has seen him since his shift began 2 hours ago," Ren reported. "We've searched the immediate area without success." "Show me," Kale said, already moving with purposeful strides toward the main building, Elena hurrying to keep pace beside him, despite Ren's cautious glance suggesting she remain behind. They arrived at the secure wing of the estate to find a small group of pack members gathered anxiously outside Draven's chamber, tension thick in the air. Talia emerged from the room itself, her expression grim as she addressed Kale directly. "He's still here, secured as expected, but something isn't right." He's been unusually calm given the circumstances, almost as though he's waiting for something. A cold, uneasy feeling settled over Elena as she absorbed this information. Memories of the dark van outside her clinic, the missing wolf becoming a man, the careful, calculated warnings Kale had given her throughout the past weeks, all coalescing into a singular, growing dread. "What if the missing guard isn't actually missing?" she said slowly, the thought forming even as she spoke it aloud. "What if he's working with Draven?" Talia and Kale exchanged a sharp, worried glance, the possibility clearly not something they had immediately considered, but one that fit disturbingly well, given everything they knew about Draven's manipulative history. "It's possible," Talia admitted grimly. "Draven has spent years cultivating loyalty through fear and favor both. Not everyone's allegiance shifted back the moment you reclaimed your position." Kale moved quickly into the secure chamber, and Elena followed despite Ren's earlier caution, needing to see Draven's expression herself, to judge whether her instincts about the danger still lingering were correct. Draven sat calmly on a simple wooden bench, his posture relaxed despite his confined circumstances, and when his eyes met Elena's across the room, that same cold, knowing smile from the trial ground crossed his face once more. "Ah," Draven said pleasantly, as though greeting welcome guests rather than his captors. "I wondered how long it would take before someone noticed the discrepancy." "What have you done?" Kale demanded, stepping forward with barely controlled fury evident in his tightened jaw. "Nothing yet," Draven replied smoothly, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. "But I do wonder, cousin, how confident you truly feel in the complete loyalty of everyone surrounding you. Betrayal, after all, has a way of hiding in the most unexpected places." His smile widened slightly. "You of all people should understand that better than most." Kale's hands clenched into tight fists at his sides, restraint clearly costing him significant effort. "If you've arranged something against her, Draven, exile will be the least of your concerns." "Threats," Draven said with a soft, dismissive laugh. "How predictable. Though I suppose desperation tends to strip away whatever composure remains once someone realizes exactly how vulnerable their carefully constructed victory truly is." Talia stepped forward sharply, cutting off further exchange. "Enough. We're doubling security immediately, both here and around the estate grounds generally." She turned to address the gathered guards directly. "I want every single pack member's location and activity accounted for within the hour. If there is a traitor among us, we find them before they can act on whatever instructions Draven has already given." As the search began in earnest throughout the estate, Elena found herself pulled aside by Kale into a quiet alcove away from the growing commotion, his expression tight with barely restrained worry. "I need you to stay close to Talia or myself at all times until we understand exactly what threat we're facing," he said firmly. "No exceptions, Elena. Please." "I understand," Elena said, though the fear coiling tighter in her chest made the promise easier to make than she suspected it might be to keep. The search continued, late into the night, without locating the missing guard, and as exhaustion finally forced most of the estate into uneasy rest, Elena lay awake in the guest chamber she had been given, every small sound outside her window sending fresh spikes of anxiety through her body. She had nearly drifted into restless sleep when a soft, unfamiliar creak from somewhere near her window jolted her fully awake. She sat up slowly, straining to listen through the darkness, telling herself it was likely nothing more than the old building settling. But then the creak came again, followed by the unmistakable sound of her window latch being carefully, deliberately manipulated from outside. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs as she scrambled silently out of bed, reaching for the small dagger Ren had given her during training sessions, tucked beneath her pillow, exactly as he had instructed. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, breath held, every muscle tense, as the window slid open slowly, and a dark, unfamiliar figure began climbing carefully into the room. The figure had barely straightened fully inside the room when Elena moved, driven by pure instinct and the weeks of training Ren had drilled into her. She struck out with the flat handle of her dagger, catching the intruder across the side of the head hard enough to stagger him, his surprised grunt of pain filling the dark room. Before he could fully recover his balance, Elena shouted as loudly as her lungs would allow, the sound tearing through the quiet estate. The door burst open seconds later, Kale moving with a speed that seemed almost inhuman, crossing the room and slamming the intruder against the wall before the man could reach for whatever weapon he carried. In the sudden light of the hallway spilling into the room, Elena recognized the missing guard immediately, his face pale with fear, as Kale's grip tightened around his throat. "Who sent you?" Kale demanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl that Elena had never heard from him before. The guard's eyes darted toward Elena, then back to Kale, terror overriding whatever loyalty had driven him to attempt this in the first place. "Draven," he choked out. "He promised protection for my family if I brought her to him, said if I refused, he had allies who would make sure my family suffered for it regardless." Kale's expression darkened further, though something like understanding flickered briefly beneath his fury. "Draven remains confined. How exactly did he intend for you to deliver on this promise?" "There's a passage," the guard admitted, his voice trembling. "Beneath the old servant quarters, leading outside the estate walls entirely. He has allies waiting there, ready to receive her once I brought her through." Talia arrived moments later, along with several additional guards, quickly taking custody of the frightened guard, while Kale turned his full attention to Elena, checking her over carefully for any injury, despite her assurances that she was unharmed. "You're certain you're all right?" he asked, his hands gentle, despite the lingering fury evident in his tense frame. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. Ren's training paid off. Kale pulled her into a tight embrace, relief evident in the way his entire body seemed to relax slightly despite the ongoing danger. "I should never have allowed you to stay in a room alone tonight," he murmured into her hair. "I should have insisted you remain closer." "You couldn't have known," Elena said softly, though she found herself grateful for the warmth of his arms around her regardless. "None of us expected Draven to move so quickly, even from confinement." Talia returned from questioning the captured guard, her expression grim. "He's confirmed everything." Draven arranged this well before the trial even took place, anticipating that regardless of the outcome, having leverage over Elena would prove valuable. The passage beneath the servant quarters leads to a location roughly 2 miles beyond the estate walls, where several of Draven's most loyal supporters have apparently been waiting. "How many?" Cale asked sharply. "Unknown exactly, but likely enough to overwhelm a small rescue party if we're not careful in our approach," Talia said. "This complicates matters considerably. If word reaches them that their plan has failed, they may attempt something more aggressive rather than simply retreating." Cale's jaw tightened as he processed this information, his protective instincts clearly warring against the practical need for careful strategy. "Then we move quickly and carefully both. I want a small, trusted team ready within the hour, prepared to intercept before Draven's allies realize their plan has failed and decide on some alternative approach instead." As preparations began throughout the estate, Elena found herself insisting, despite Cale's obvious reluctance, on remaining close to the unfolding operation, rather than being tucked away somewhere supposedly safe. "I'm not asking to be in the middle of danger," she clarified when Cale's expression grew tight with immediate objection. "But hiding somewhere alone after what just happened feels far more frightening than staying close to people I trust while this gets resolved." Cale studied her for a long moment, understanding warring visibly with protective instinct, before finally relenting. "You stay with Talia and the secondary team, positioned safely behind our main group. No exceptions this time, Elena. I mean it." "I promise," she said, and this time, given the very real danger she had just narrowly avoided, she meant it with far more conviction than her earlier assurance. The rescue and interception operation moved forward under cover of darkness, Cale leading a small, carefully selected team through the hidden passage the guard had revealed, while Elena remained with Talia's group positioned a safe distance away, ready to provide support if circumstances required it. The tense wait stretched agonizingly, every passing minute feeling like an hour, as Elena strained to hear any sound that might indicate what was unfolding beyond her sight. Finally, nearly an hour after Cale's team had disappeared into the passage, the sound of approaching footsteps sent Elena's heart leaping into her throat, relief flooding through her as she recognized Cale's voice calling out reassurance before he even came fully into view. He emerged from the darkness with his team intact, though several bore minor injuries, escorting a small group of captured individuals, whose expressions ranged from defiant to visibly relieved that the confrontation had ended without greater violence. "It's handled," Cale said as he reached Elena, exhaustion evident but relief clear in his voice. Draven's allies scattered the moment they realized their plan had failed, and reinforcements had arrived. "We managed to capture several key figures before the rest fled into the surrounding forest." "And Draven himself?" Elena asked. "Still confined, exactly where we left him," Talia confirmed, having received updates through pack members who had remained monitoring the secure chamber throughout the operation. "Though this attempt makes clear that simple confinement will no longer suffice, given his continued influence, even from within our own walls." The following morning, the full pack council convened to determine Draven's final judgment, the failed kidnapping attempt weighing heavily against whatever leniency might otherwise have been considered. Elena sat quietly beside Talia during the formal proceedings, watching as Cale presided over the council with a gravity and fairness that reminded her once again of the weight of responsibility he carried, even towards someone who had caused him and his people such profound harm. "Draven Cross," Cale said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the formal chamber, "your actions both in seizing power through betrayal years ago and your continued efforts to cause harm even from confinement leave the council no reasonable alternative. You are permanently exiled from all territories under Nightfall authority, stripped entirely of any claim to leadership, standing, or protection our laws would otherwise extend. Should you return to these lands or attempt further harm against any member of this pack or those connected to it, the consequences will be final and absolute." Draven's expression remained carefully controlled throughout the judgment, though something dark and simmering flickered briefly in his eyes before he was led away under heavy guard toward the estate's outer boundaries, presumably to be released beyond territory lines with clear warning never to return. As the council chamber slowly emptied, Elena approached Kale, relief and lingering unease mixing together in her chest, despite the formal resolution finally reached. "Do you think this is truly over now?" she asked quietly. Kale's expression remained thoughtful, cautious optimism tempered by hard-earned realism. "I would like to believe so," he admitted, "but I've learned not to underestimate Draven's capacity for finding new avenues toward whatever he still believes he deserves. Regardless, we'll remain vigilant, together." Elena leaned into him, finding comfort in his steady presence despite the uncertainty still lingering at the edges of what should have felt like clear, decisive victory. Whatever challenges still waited beyond this moment, she found herself grateful, more than she could fully express, that she would not be facing them alone. Weeks passed following Draven's formal exile, and slowly, cautiously, the Nightfall estate began settling into a rhythm of genuine peace that Elena had not fully believed possible after everything they had endured together. Kale's leadership brought visible relief throughout the territory. Pack members who had lived under years of fear and control, now moving through their daily lives with a lightness Elena had not witnessed during her first anxious days among them. Fields once left neglected under Draven's indifferent rule were replanted. Old alliances with neighboring territories, severed through years of Draven's paranoid isolationism, slowly began mending under Kale's more open, collaborative approach to leadership. Elena found herself settling into this new life, with a comfort that occasionally surprised her, given how completely foreign this world had seemed only months earlier. She continued practicing veterinary medicine, adapting her skills to treat pack members who preferred her care over more traditional healers, and gradually built genuine friendships among people who had once regarded her only with cautious suspicion. Talia had become something like a mentor and friend both, sharing stories of pack history and customs during quiet evening conversations that Elena had come to treasure. Mira visited occasionally, her sharp wit and easy friendship offering a welcome balance to the sometimes overwhelming formality of pack politics. Even Ren, initially reserved and formal in his interactions with her, had warmed considerably, occasionally teasing her good-naturedly about her improving combat skills during their now regular training sessions. Yet despite this hard-won peace, Elena noticed Kale carried a quiet watchfulness that never fully disappeared. A residual wariness, she understood, came from years of betrayal and loss that could not simply vanish overnight, regardless of how thoroughly justice had been served. She found him one evening standing alone, on the same balcony where they had shared their quiet, fearful conversation the night before the trial, his expression distant as he watched the sunset paint the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. "You're thinking about him again," Elena said softly, joining him at the railing. Kale's mouth curved into a faint, rueful smile. "Is it that obvious?" "A little," Elena admitted, leaning against his side, as his arm came naturally around her shoulders. "Do you think he'll try something else, even from exile?" "Perhaps," Kale said honestly, refusing to offer false reassurance, simply for comfort's sake. "Draven has never been someone who accepts limitation gracefully, but I've also come to understand something important these past weeks, something I don't think I fully grasped before facing him in that trial." "What's that?" Elena asked. "That living in constant fear of what he might do next only grants him power over me. He no longer deserves to hold," Kale said, his voice steady with hard-earned conviction. "I spent years trapped, both physically as a wolf and emotionally, by grief and betrayal, allowing his actions to define the shape of my entire existence. I refuse to continue giving him that power, now that I've reclaimed my life and my position both." He turned to look at her fully, something warm and certain, replacing the earlier distance in his expression. "Especially now that I have so much more worth focusing my attention toward instead." Elena's heart warmed at his words, though a teasing smile tugged at her lips, despite the seriousness of the conversation. "Careful, Alpha King. That almost sounded like a compliment." "It absolutely was," Kale said, laughing softly, the sound rare and precious given how much weight he typically carried. He turned to face her more fully, his expression growing serious again, though warmth remained evident beneath the gravity. "Elena, these past months have changed everything for me. Not simply my circumstances, my position, my freedom from that curse, but something far more fundamental within myself. I had genuinely forgotten what it felt like to hope for something beyond mere survival, until the night you knelt in the snow and refused to let me die. I didn't even know what I was doing that night, Elena said softly, echoing words she had spoken weeks earlier, during their very first honest conversation. I know, Cale said, his gaze steady and full of quiet emotion, and that remains part of why it means so much. You gave everything that night, expecting absolutely nothing in return, not knowing who I was, not knowing what your kindness might set into motion. That kind of selfless compassion is rarer than you likely realize, Elena, and I find myself more grateful for it, and for you, with each passing day. Elena felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his voice. I'm grateful too, she admitted. For all of this, strange and overwhelming as it's been, I never expected my life to change this dramatically, from one single choice, to help an injured animal behind my clinic. Life rarely announces its most significant turning points in advance, Cale said, reaching up to gently brush away the single tear that had escaped down her cheek. Sometimes the most ordinary moments end up mattering more than we could possibly imagine at the time. They stood together in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky, stars slowly emerging overhead one by one. Elena found herself reflecting on everything that had unfolded since that snowy night behind her clinic. The fear, the danger, the impossible revelations about a hidden world she had never known existed. Yet through all of it, she realized she would not have chosen a different path, even if given the opportunity to avoid the danger and uncertainty entirely. Meeting Cale, however chaotic and frightening the circumstances, had brought genuine purpose and connection into a life that had felt quietly hollow for longer than she had fully acknowledged, even to herself. What happens now? She asked eventually, breaking the peaceful silence between them. For the pack, I mean. For you. Cale considered the question thoughtfully. Rebuilding continues, steadily and hopefully permanently this time. Strengthening alliances driven damaged through years of isolation, ensuring the pack's younger generation grows up understanding leadership means service and protection, not domination through fear as Draven demonstrated. He paused, his gaze softening as it settled on her face. And personally, I find myself hoping for a future that includes building something lasting alongside you, if that's something you might want as well. Elena's breath caught at the vulnerability in his question, understanding the weight behind such words coming from someone who had lost so much to betrayal and loss throughout his life. I want that, she said softly, without hesitation, more than I think I fully realized until just now, hearing you ask. Cale's expression brightened with a warmth and hope that transformed his typically composed features into something younger, lighter, freed momentarily from the constant weight of duty and vigilance he carried. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to close the distance herself if she chose, and this time, when their lips finally met, it carried none of the careful restraint from their earlier moment on this same balcony. It was warm, certain, and filled with the quiet promise of everything still ahead of them both. When they finally parted, Elena rested her forehead gently against his, both of them smiling in the comfortable, easy way of two people who had weathered genuine hardship together and emerged stronger, more connected, for having faced it side by side rather than alone. Whatever comes next, Elena murmured, I'm glad I get to face it with you. As am I, Cale replied softly, pulling her closer against him, as the stars continued emerging overhead, witnesses to a quiet promise neither of them needed to speak aloud to fully understand. Below them, throughout the estate grounds, the pack settled into peaceful evening routines, lights glowing warmly from windows scattered across the property, laughter occasionally drifting up from gathered groups enjoying the simple comfort of safety finally restored. It was, Elena realized as she stood wrapped in Cale's arms watching the peaceful scene below, exactly the kind of quiet, hard-earned happiness that made every frightening, uncertain moment leading toward this point entirely worthwhile. The formal coronation ceremony took place on a bright, clear morning, nearly 2 months after the trial that had reclaimed Cale's rightful position, and the entire estate had transformed for the occasion. Banners bearing the Nightfall crest hanging from every visible structure, long tables arranged across the main courtyard already filling with food prepared by pack members who had spent days in joyful preparation for the celebration. Elena stood near the front of the gathered crowd, dressed in clothing Talia had helped her select, simple yet elegant, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her as she watched Cale approach the ceremonial platform at the center of the courtyard. He looked different somehow, standing tall and composed in formal attire befitting his restored position, yet Elena could still see clearly beneath the ceremonial trappings the same thoughtful, burdened, deeply caring man who had first stumbled bleeding into her clinic all those months earlier. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd as he took his position, and the warm, private smile he offered her amid the formal solemnity of the occasion sent familiar warmth blooming through her chest. Talia stepped forward to lead the formal ceremony, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed crowd as she recited words that had marked countless leadership transitions throughout the PAC's long history. Today, we formally and permanently restore Cale Ashbourne to his rightful position as Alpha King of Nightfall Territory, a position earned not merely through birthright, but proven through trial, through sacrifice, and through unwavering commitment to the genuine well-being of all who call this territory home. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic cheers as Cale accepted the formal symbols of his restored leadership, a heavy ceremonial pendant bearing the ancient crest of his family line, placed carefully around his neck by Talia herself, tears visible in the older woman's eyes as she completed a duty she had clearly hoped for throughout the difficult years of Draven's rule. Cale turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice steady and resonant, carrying easily across the courtyard despite the emotion evident beneath his composed exterior. For years, many of you lived under leadership built on fear rather than genuine care, control rather than protection. I stand before you today not simply to reclaim a position stolen from me, but to promise something far more important, that this territory will move forward guided by the same principles my parents once championed, strength used to protect rather than dominate, leadership earned through service rather than demanded through intimidation. The crowd's cheers grew louder still, genuine emotion visible across countless faces throughout the gathering. Cale continued, his gaze finding Elena's once more amid the sea of faces watching him. I also want to acknowledge something perhaps unconventional for a ceremony such as this, but important nonetheless. My return to this position, my very survival through the years of the curse that trapped me, exists because of an act of genuine, selfless kindness offered by someone who had no knowledge of who I truly was, or what breaking that curse might mean for our entire community. Elena felt her cheeks warm, as heads throughout the crowd turned curiously toward her, though the warmth in Cale's gaze steadied the sudden self-consciousness rising within her. Elena Hart showed me, during the darkest moment of my captivity, that compassion offered without expectation of reward remains one of the most powerful forces capable of changing fate itself. Cale continued, I would not stand here today without her, and I intend to spend whatever years lie ahead honoring that gift, both to her personally and to this entire community she has since become such an integral, valued part of. The crowd's warm applause washed over Elena as Cale stepped down from the ceremonial platform, moving directly through the parting crowd toward where she stood, his expression open and filled with quiet, certain purpose that made her breath catch even after months of growing closer together. You didn't need to say all that, Elena murmured as he reached her, though genuine warmth rather than embarrassment colored her voice. I wanted to, Cale replied simply, taking her hands gently in his own. The pack deserves to understand exactly why their leader stands before them today, restored and hopeful for the future ahead, rather than still trapped in despair and isolation. Around them, the formal ceremony transitioned smoothly into genuine celebration, music beginning to play from musicians gathered near the courtyard's edge, laughter and conversation filling the warm afternoon air, as pack members mingled freely, relief and hope evident throughout the joyful gathering. Elena found herself swept into the celebration alongside Cale, dancing clumsily but happily as he patiently guided her through unfamiliar steps, sharing meals with Talia, Ren, and Mira, who had returned specifically for the occasion, and gradually feeling herself fully, genuinely welcomed into a community that had once regarded her only with cautious uncertainty. As evening settled gently over the estate, the celebration slowly quieting into comfortable, contented conversation among smaller gathered groups, Cale led Elena away from the main courtyard, toward the quiet garden path, where they had shared so many important conversations throughout the past difficult months. He stopped beneath a large tree at the garden's edge, moonlight filtering gently through its branches, and turned to face her with an expression that mixed nervousness with quiet determination, in a way Elena had rarely witnessed from him. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, his voice slightly unsteady, despite his obvious effort to remain composed, "though I understand if the timing feels sudden, given everything else that's unfolded these past months." Elena's heart began racing as she watched him reach carefully into his pocket, withdrawing a small, simple ring, crafted from silver, its design elegant, yet understated, in a way that felt distinctly personal, rather than merely ceremonial. "Cale," she breathed, understanding dawning even before he spoke further. "Elena Hart," Cale said, his voice steadying with quiet conviction as he held her gaze. "You saved my life during the darkest moment I have ever experienced, expecting absolutely nothing in return. You've since shown me, time and again, exactly what genuine partnership and love can look like, built on honesty and mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. I love you, completely and without reservation, and I would be honored beyond words if you would agree to stand beside me, not simply as my partner in this new chapter of leadership, but as my wife." Tears filled Elena's eyes as she looked between the ring and Cale's hopeful, vulnerable expression, memories of that snowy, blood-soaked night flooding back to her, the moment she had knelt beside a dying wolf, never imagining it would lead her toward a love this profound and unexpected. "Yes," she said softly, then again with growing certainty as joy overwhelmed her. "Yes, absolutely yes." Cale's face broke into a wide, genuine smile, relief and happiness evident in every line of his expression, as he slipped the ring carefully onto her finger, before pulling her into a warm, tender embrace. Around them, the garden remained peacefully quiet, moonlight continuing to filter softly through the branches above, distant sounds of celebration still drifting gently from the courtyard beyond. "I never imagined my life could look like this," Elena murmured against his chest, happiness and disbelief mixing together in her voice. A veterinary assistant from a quiet town, engaged to an alpha king. "Life rarely follows the paths we originally imagined for ourselves," Cale said, echoing words he had spoken to her months earlier, during a quieter, more uncertain moment between them. "Sometimes the most unexpected turns lead us exactly where we were always meant to be." Elena smiled up at him, complete contentment settling warmly through her chest, as she considered everything that had unfolded since that fateful, frightening night behind her clinic. The fear, the danger, the impossible revelations about a hidden world she never knew existed, all of it had led her here, standing beneath moonlight, in a garden that had become as much a home to her as the quiet town she had left behind, engaged to a man whose life she had saved, without ever imagining the profound way it would transform her own in return. "I forgave a stranger that night," Elena said softly, glancing down at the ring, now resting on her finger, never imagining forgiveness could lead somewhere as beautiful as this. Cale pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, his voice warm with quiet certainty as he replied, "Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness carry the power to change entire kingdoms, Elena. You proved that beyond any doubt the moment you knelt beside me in the snow and chose compassion over fear." He tightened his arms gently around her, both of them turning to look up at the stars scattered across the clear night sky above. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making certain you never regret that choice." Together, they stood beneath the quiet garden trees, hearts full and futures intertwined, ready to face whatever challenges still awaited them, not as a wounded king and the stranger who saved him, but as true partners bound by love, freely given and gratefully returned, prepared to build a life together that honored everything they had both fought so hard to reclaim.